I am Naomi, and this is my story. The wind carries the smell of dust and dying barley across the hills of Bethlehem, and even now, so many years later, I can close my eyes and taste the famine on my tongue. It tasted like nothing. That is the cruelty of hunger. It hollows out even the flavor of the world. I remember standing in the doorway of our small stone house, watching my husband Elimelech grind his jaw as he looked out over our fields. The barley stalks were brittle and pale, bent low not with the weight of grain, but with thirst. Bethlehem. The name means house of bread, and yet there was no bread in the house of bread. My sons, Mahalan and Chilion, still boys then, sat in the doorway tossing pebbles, too young to understand why their mother's hands trembled as she measured out the last of the flour. "We will go to Moab," Elimelech said one evening, not looking at me, staring instead at the horizon as though he could see across it to the fields of our enemy. For that is what Moab was to us. Not friends, not kin, a foreign land, a foreign people, worshippers of Chemosh, instead of the Lord who had brought our fathers out of Egypt. My stomach tightened at the thought. "Is there no other way?" I asked him, though I already knew the answer lived in the sunken cheeks of our neighbors, in the empty storehouses, in the silence where the sound of threshing floors used to ring. There was no other way. So we went. I will not pretend the journey was not exciting in its own terrible fashion. The crossing of the Jordan, the long, dusty road east and south into the hill country of Moab, my son's eyes wide at the strange gods carved into stone along the roadside, the foreign cadence of the Moabite tongue in the markets. I told myself this was temporary, a season. We would return when the rains came back to Judah. The rains did not come back for us. Elimelech died first. I remember the fever taking him slowly, a week of watching the man I had married, the man whose hand I had held under the wedding canopy, whose children I had borne, grow more distant with each passing day, until one morning I woke beside him, and the warmth had gone out of the room entirely. I did not weep at first. I simply sat. There is a kind of grief too large for tears, a grief that sits on the chest like a stone and will not let the lungs finish their breath. I had my sons, at least. Mahalan and Chilion grew into men in that foreign land, and, against everything my heart expected, they married Moabite women. Orpah, gentle and soft-spoken, married Chilion, and Ruth, Ruth, married my Mahlon. I did not understand it then, how the Lord was already weaving threads I could not see, placing a Moabite woman into the middle of my sorrow, who would one day become the very hand that pulled me out of it. For 10 years we lived that way. Not rich, but not starving. I began, despite myself, to love these two young women who called me by a mother's name I had not expected to hear in a foreign tongue. I watched Ruth grind grain, with her sleeves pushed back, laughing when the flour dusted her nose. I watched Orpah tend the small garden behind our house, singing under her breath in Moabite melodies. I slowly, unwillingly, came to find beautiful. And then, within the span of what felt like a single terrible breath, both my sons died. I do not have the words even now, after all these years, to describe what it is to bury a husband and then, one after another, both of your sons. Grief has a way of arriving in layers, and by the time the second son was laid in the ground, I felt something in me had gone hollow and cold, like a well that has been drawn from too many times and can give no more water. I remember sitting between Ruth and Orpah at the burial, the three of us widows now, none of us speaking, the Moabite sun beating down without mercy, without apology, as though the whole world had simply forgotten how to grieve properly. "Why, Lord?" I asked in the silence of my own heart, night after night. Why did you bring me to this land only to strip me of everything I carried into it? I did not curse God. I could not. He was too woven into the marrow of who I was. But I questioned him the way a child questions a father who has allowed a wound to go unbandaged. I did not yet understand that his hands were already at work, even in the bandaging. Word reached me, as it does even in foreign lands, carried on the mouths of traveling merchants. The Lord had visited his people in Judah and given them bread again. The famine had broken. Something inside me, something I thought had died with Elimelech, stirred. Home, Bethlehem. The thought of it ached like a bone healing wrong and having to be broken again to be set right. I am going back, I told Ruth and Orpah one morning, my voice steadier than I felt. You are young. Go back to your mother's houses. Find new husbands among your own people. The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. I kissed them both, and we wept together on that dusty road, the kind of weeping that comes from the belly and leaves you shaking. Orpah, after a long and anguished moment, kissed me farewell and turned back toward Moab, toward the only safety she had ever known. I did not blame her. I would have told my own daughter to do the same. But Ruth did not move. I looked at her standing there on that road, dust settling on her sandaled feet, her dark eyes fixed on mine, with a resolve I had not seen even in my sons. Go back, my daughter, I urged her again, more firmly this time, because I loved her too much to let her tie her future to my ruin. Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Go with her. And Ruth said the words that have echoed down through every generation since, words I did not deserve and will never stop being humbled by. Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also if anything but death parts me from you. I could not answer her. I simply stood in the road and wept, not the grief weeping I had grown so accustomed to, but something else entirely, something I had almost forgotten the shape of. Loyalty like that is not merely a decision of the will. It is a kind of love that costs everything and counts the cost worth paying. I did not know it then, but I was watching faith itself walk beside me in the form of a young Moabite widow who had every reason to abandon me, and none to stay. We walked the long road back to Bethlehem together, two women with empty hands and emptier futures, at least as the world would count such things. When we finally came down into the town, the dust of the road still on our feet, the whole place stirred. Women I had known since girlhood came running from their doorways, their faces caught between recognition and disbelief. Is this Naomi? They whispered to one another. Do not call me Naomi, I told them, and I heard my own voice break on the words. Naomi means pleasant. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. I meant every word of it in that moment. I did not yet know that emptiness in the hands of God is often simply the shape he uses to pour something new. It was barley harvest when we arrived, the fields gold and heavy, the very picture of the abundance my own life seemed to lack. Ruth, ever practical, ever willing to bear the weight I could not, went out to glean in the fields, gathering the leftover grain the harvesters left behind for the poor, as the law of Moses commanded. I sat at home those first days, my hands idle in my lap, my heart still too bruised to do much more than watch her go. But the Lord, I would come to learn, does not waste even the smallest details. Ruth returned that first evening with an ephah of barley, far more than a single gleaner should have gathered, and something bright and cautious in her eyes. "The name of the man in whose field I worked today," she said, setting down the grain, "is Boaz." My breath caught. Boaz, a relative of my husband Elimelech, a man of standing and, more than that, a man of character. I had heard it said of him even in the years before I left for Moab. And here was the law again, older than my grief, wiser than my bitterness, a kinsman redeemer, one who could, if he chose, restore what death had taken. "The Lord bless him," I said, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not grief this time, but hope, unfamiliar and almost painful in its return, like blood flowing back into a limb that has gone numb. "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." I will not walk through every step of what followed the threshing floor at night, the careful instructions I gave Ruth, the trembling courage it took for her to lie at his feet and ask him to spread his garment over her, claiming the kinsman's duty according to our law. I will only say that I watched, from a distance too far to see but near enough to pray without ceasing, as the Lord moved a righteous man's heart toward redemption. Boaz did not take advantage of a vulnerable widow, though he could have. He honored her, protected her reputation, and pursued the matter openly at the city gate before the elders, settling the redemption rightly and lawfully, refusing every shortcut that might have shamed her. When he took Ruth as his wife before the assembled town, I stood among the women of Bethlehem, the same women who had once called me Mara, and I could not stop the tears. When Ruth bore a son, the women came to me, and I will never forget what they said, because I have turned the words over in my heart 1,000 times since. "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." I took that child into my arms. Obed, they named him, and I felt something in my chest that had been clenched tight since the day I buried Elimelech finally loosen. I laid him against my breast and became his nurse, and the women of the town said a son had been born to Naomi. In a way, he was, not by blood alone, but by every mercy the Lord had stitched together from the ruins of my own story. I did not know then, how could I have known, that this small, warm child sleeping against my heart would become the grandfather of Jesse, whose son David would be anointed king over Israel. I did not know that the very bloodline that carried the promise of a redeemer for all the world would run straight through a Moabite widow's loyalty and an old woman's emptiness. I went away from Bethlehem full and came back empty, but the Lord was not finished. He never is. If I could speak to you now across all these years, I would tell you this. Bitterness feels like the truth when you are standing in the middle of loss, but it is never the last word God intends for your story. I called myself Mara in my grief, and I meant it, but grief is not prophecy. The Lord can carry a woman through famine, through widowhood, through the burial of every man she loved, and still bring her home to hold a redeemer in her arms. He did it for me. He can do it for you. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.